Hello, everyone. Steve here, back with another tabletop baseball video. This one is actually probably less about tabletop baseball and more about baseball itself. I started on this presentation a few months ago, probably late summer, and only now posting it. I wasn't sure where I was going to end up with this presentation. I found that this presentation to some extent overlaps a few that we've done before on this channel. The topic today is Baltimore's 4 20-game winners, which of course was 1971. Quite an unusual feat. Part of my goal here is just to examine how unusual that feat may have been. And with that, let's get started. So, as usual, I want to remind people that I make these PowerPoint presentations available on my Google Drive. You just have to email me to get access. As I mentioned, this video kind of overlaps with a few other videos I've done, and I've put the links to those videos here, as well as I'll put it in the video description. I also have another link about the discussion on Delphi forum recently of the interaction of fielding and pitching. The topic inspired a lot of heated discussion, I guess I'll say, but it's an interesting topic relevant to today's video. As usual, I look forward to your comments. Like and subscribe if you would like. So, Mike Cuellar, Jim Palmer, Pat Dobson, Dave McNally were the 4 pitchers who had 20 wins in 1971, took the Orioles to the World Series. The first thing I looked at was the career of these pitchers, and actually Mike Cuellar pitched 4 innings in 1959, but otherwise kind of made his debut in 1964. The color coding here is indicative of the teams that these pitchers played on, with the orange being, of course, the Orioles. The numbers in the top here are their ages in each individual year. So in the case of Cuellar, he was actually a little older as pitchers go, but he wasn't really late career. He was really mid-career, arguably. Possibly one of the more underrated pitchers of that era, if we think about it. He played initially for a short period of time for Cincinnati and St. Louis, and then went to Houston, which I didn't realize till I did this presentation. And then he ended up with a partial year with the California Angels at the age of 40. Jim Palmer was only 25 in 1971. He came into the league actually at age 19 in 1965. For some reason, he missed 1968, probably injury. But he was arguably early career here. He did pitch all the way to 1984. When he retired at age 38, and all of those years were with the Orioles. We have kind of the opposite here with Pat Dobson. Dobson started out with Detroit. He pitched a year with San Diego, then only pitched 2 years for the Orioles. So he was 29 in 1971. He went on to play shortly for the Braves, and then multiple years with the Yankees, and then finished up with Cleveland. So a decent career, a 10 or 11 year career. Then we have Dave McNally. He was 28 in 1971. As it turned out, he was later in his career. He did start also at the age of 19 in 1962. He pitched almost entirely with the Orioles, although he had a short stint with Montreal in his last year. I think he may have only pitched a couple of games that year. So, the stars aligned here for these four to be pitching on the Orioles in 1971. And Dobson probably is the outlier here, given his career with multiple teams. The bottom table here is wins by year, and the color coding is the same to indicate the teams they were on. And of course, 1971 is highlighted, where Cuellar, Palmer, and Dobson had 20 wins, and McNally had 21. What you see here with Cuellar, I talked about his career, but it's not entirely unusual that he won 20 games. He did it multiple times, and including 18 games in 72 and 73. So, in the heart of his career, he was a solid pitcher for sure. Palmer won 20 games multiple times, as you can see here as well, including 70, 71, 72, 73. So it's not all that unlikely that he would get 20 wins in 1971. Dobson, as we mentioned, is kind of the outlier. The only time he ever won 20 was in 1971 with the Orioles, possibly the best team that he played on during his career. And then we have Dave McNally, and he won 22 games in 68, 20 in 69, 24 in 70, and 21 in 1971. Arguably, 1971 was the peak for him. And again, once again, the stars aligned, so you have 4 20-game winners. One of the things I'll mention here, and as opposed to anywhere else, is an interesting stat is in 1971, each one of these pitchers, on average, for their starts, pitched about midway through the 8th inning. So I don't know if that's a cause or an effect statistic, but they were pitching well, and they pitched deep into games, and that kind of correlates with their winning seasons, or season in this case. So I have put together some statistical comparisons. First one is ERA, which obviously isn't the best stat, but the highest ERA was 3.08, which is pretty good. And then you go down from there, but all these ERAs were good, which is no surprise in the sense that you would expect a good ERA if you're going to win 20 games. I have put the FIP statistic here, and you saw in the earlier links, I've done some analysis related to FIP, which I guess stands for fielding independent pitching. But this statistic rewards strikeout pitchers and low walk pitchers and low home run pitchers, I guess I would say. I may not have that exactly right, but in any event, there can be a difference between a FIP and an ERA, and arguably FIP is a purer measure of the pitcher's performance. I say arguably. And this is kind of telling. It's interesting. Cuellar had the highest ERA. He also had the second highest FIP, which I believe he was hurt by the fact he gave up a fair number of home runs, although I'd have to double check that. Palmer had a good FIP. Dobson actually had a good FIP, very close to his ERA. And actually, McNally had the higher FIP. This would somewhat argue that it's surprising that these guys all had 20-game seasons, 20-win seasons. Who knows? At the bottom, I have the batting average for balls in play, which is a statistic kind of somewhat related to FIP. And typically, you will find this statistic on average to be between 280, 290 range. And I think the sabermetric argument here is that at least for the most part, the pitcher can't influence this batting average and balls in play. Again, I've talked about this in my other video. The interesting thing here is that for all four of these pitchers, and unfortunately McNally is cut off the slide, but Cuellar had a 239 BAbip, Palmer 251, Dobson 264, and McNally the lowest at 231. These are all obviously lower than the average that I mentioned before of the 280, 290-ish range. So for whatever reason, when the ball did get put in play, these guys produced a low hit rate for those balls in play, which I think is a big contributor to to why they were able to win 20 games and have a low ERA. So take Cuellar, he had a high FIP but a low BAbip, and the same thing for McNally. He had the highest ERA among the four, but the lowest BAbip at 231. Now, one of the things I've looked at here is the progression over their careers. And so you can see that Cuellar in 71 and 72 did have a low BAbip. I'm going to call it BAbip from here on out. And he was low in 1969, 230. But for most of his career, he was arguably had a lower than average BAbip. We'll call it BAbip. Palmer, again, below average essentially all of his career, and definitely in 71. Dobson probably was right around the average or at the upper end of the average range in a lot of his years. It just so happened in 71 he was better than average. And you can't see McNally, but he was also low for his entire career, except for maybe that last stint with Montreal. His lowest was 1968 at 203, and his highest was with Montreal at 287. This is probably meaningful. I think some might say that this would argue that pitchers can control the batting average for balls in play, and I think over time it's proven that some of that is true. Some of that involves the ability to induce pop-ups. Some of it, I think, is impacted by the ground ball to fly ball ratio for these pitchers. I have said before, and I'll say it again, that the Orioles defense played a role in why these guys were so good in 1971 and why I believe the batting average for the balls in play was relatively low for these four pitchers. And so I've summarized the main defensive players other than catchers for the Orioles. And you can see the first pair of numbers is the fielding percent compared to the league fielding percent. And in almost every case, the fielding percent for the Orioles was better than the league average. I look at a statistic on Baseball Reference called Rtot. There's a related statistic called Rtot per year. And a positive number is good. And once you get around, I don't know, let's say 4 or 5, it starts to get really good. And then you see like Brooks Robinson is off the charts here. And Mark Belanger is really high as well. So these guys were really strong up the middle, including Paul Blair, who was the regular center fielder, had a really, really good RTOT statistic. I did put here the stratomatic primary rating for these players, and you have, in the case of 3 players, they have a 1, which is the best that you can get. You had 4 Gold Glove Award winners here, which probably influenced stratomatic, giving most of these guys a 1 rating, and then you have a few 2s and some 3s. And then stratomatic has an error rating, which is kind of separated from the primary rating or the range rating. And this is the number in this rating is indicative of how many errors they might make in a 162 game season, or the equivalent innings, if I'm not mistaken. And you can see, corresponding to the high fielding percentage, that these guys did not commit a lot of errors. I also happen to have the replay baseball ratings, and I believe 1 is the best here on a 1 to 5 scale, and you do have some 1s and a 2 for these people. I think it's universally understood that Robinson and Belanger were very, very, very good defenders. Okay, I mentioned kind of ground out or ground ball fly ball ratio. Unfortunately, Baseball Reference does not have ground ball fly ball ratio available in these years that we're studying. They do have a related statistic called ground outs versus fly outs, and so we'll take what we can get. So the major league average for this time frame was probably a ground out to air out ratio of 1.10. You can see Cuellar was just below that average. Palmer was way below. So presumably he put the ball in the air a lot more than other pitchers, whether those are flyouts, line outs, or pop-ups, I don't know. Dobson was above the average, so he was not really a ground ball pitcher by this indication, and McNally was just above the average in 1971. What's interesting is that Palmer and McNally, for the early part of his career, were consistently putting the ball in the air as opposed to inducing ground outs, whereas Cuellar pretty consistently put the ball in the air at a higher rate or at the average rate, I guess I'll say. And then the same for Dobson, who probably even had more balls in the air than the average. And my only point for putting this here, and it's really just food for thought, is that it's possible, and this is related to sim design, but it's possible that the Orioles defense affected these pitchers differently. And my thought was, maybe Jim Palmer got people out with flyouts and lineouts and pop-outs, and really didn't have to rely as much on the Brooks Robinsons and Mark Belangers of the world to help him out. Whereas a guy like Dobson, 1971, and maybe to some extent McNally, did in fact need and benefit from putting the ball on the ground. I don't know. If you have any thoughts on this, I would appreciate it. That might be it for this. I don't want to extend this longer than it needs to be. As always, be interested in your comments and thoughts. Take care.